guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. Today's video is one that I am excited to do, but I'm also very nervous because it does involve the government. As you can probably tell by the title, today we're going to be talking about Mkultra, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about before. But if I seem a little off or scatterbrained in this video, it is just because this specific video is one that I am quite nervous to make. So I want to start off by saying, by making this video, it is because I'm trying to switch things up a little bit. I didn't want to stick to cryptid type creatures or hauntings for the entire week, I guess, so I wanted to add a video like this in there. This will also, I think, be the first conspiracy video that I've ever covered on this channel. However, this actually isn't really a conspiracy because a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about within this video is now known to be the truth. But with that all being said, let's get right into it. So I'm going to start off right now by giving you a basic rundown of what exactly Mkultra is. So Project Mkultra is a set of mind control experiments that were performed in some cases illegally on both American and Canadian citizens. These tests were created by the CIA, and everything that was going on with these experiments was allegedly known about by the American and Canadian government. So like I mentioned briefly, many of the subjects who were targeted for these experiments didn't know exactly what was happening to them or what was being experimented on them, and many of the subjects who were used for these experiments didn't even know they were being experimented on, which is obviously highly illegal. These experiments, or this set of experiments, took place between the years of 1953 up until about 1973, but it is speculated that some of these experiments can still be going on today. However, it is said that these stopped taking place in 1973, and they weren't really known about until 1975 when an investigation was going on into the CIA because they were speculated of doing many illegal things. This all really started in the 1950s and the 1960s during the Cold War. The reason that this started is because the American government feared that their rivals were using mind control on US Army soldiers who were being held as prisoners of war in Korea. They thought that they were being mind controlled on and experimented on. And so because of that, in 1953, it was approved that the government would now be testing those experiments, which is the development and where Mkultra kind of started. However, it was believed that this was going on even a little bit before that. They thought that they were using mind control on US prisoners, and so they started to experiment and kind of try to tap into mind control for themselves. But this all was really approved and officially started in 1953 when they developed Project Mkultra. So during these experiments, they were trying to tap into mind control by using drugs such as LSD as well as other psychological manipulators, and following that they would treat these patients with shock therapy and paralytics and things along those lines, but just absolutely crazy stuff. Can you imagine being on a hallucinogenic drug or a psychedelic drug and then going into a paralyzed state or being treated with shock therapy? That trauma from that is something that I personally don't think that you could ever recover from. It would just be so messed up to be in a state of mind like that and then to have all of these things going on and happening to you. And again, many of the people who were going through these experiments did not agree to this and didn't even know they were being experimented on. These experiments had about 150 or more test subjects and were mainly run out of prisons, hospitals, and universities in both America and Canada. Now, like I just mentioned, there were about 150 or more subjects who were tested on in these experiments. However, that number is not exact, and the number of people who were experimented on could be much higher than that, because during this entire time, the agency who was running these tests didn't really keep very good documentation of the test subjects, and even then, all of the documents to go along with Project Mkultra were completely destroyed in 1973 when the project came to an abrupt halt. So let's backtrack a little bit here because I want to talk about what exactly they wish to achieve by creating mind control experiments on these people. So obviously they were looking to obtain control over people's minds, but the reason for this is because they wanted to use them as, I guess, like sleeper cells or weapons of war. They wanted to be able to manipulate the human brain so that people could go longer without food, water, warmth, things like that you would normally need to live. They also wanted to make it so that they could manipulate the human brain so that it wouldn't respond the same way to pain. The reason for all of this is so that if an American soldier, or just an American or Canadian in general, were captured by their rivals, while they were being held captive, while they would be being deprived of food, water, being tortured, it would be more likely that the person wouldn't crack if they had all of this done to them, because they wouldn't need food, they wouldn't need water, their pain tolerance would be so high that none of this would get to them, so they wouldn't be sharing any of the information that they could possibly know that would be detrimental to the American government. I hope that's an okay explanation. I'm not really good at explaining those kinds of things, but I think that does give an overall gist of what exactly they were trying to achieve here. During these experiments, they also wished to be able to inflict amnesia when needed for obvious reasons. They also wanted to be able to inflict shock and confusion when needed. And the one thing that I personally think is the most messed up about all of this is they wanted to be able to inflict physical disablement, meaning that you would just be going about your normal life and all of a sudden your legs wouldn't work, maybe your arms wouldn't work, something along those lines, which is just absolutely so crazy. So all of these experiments were going on a lot of the time on people who were not even aware that they were being experimented on, and they were being given high doses of drugs, and there wasn't usually a medical professional in the room to make sure things went smoothly or in case there was a problem. Again, many of the people who were experimented on in these cases didn't know they were being experimented on and were picked actually at complete random. So something that kind of sparked my interest while studying this case is how did they know that the people who they were distributing these drugs to could actually physically handle the drugs that they were being distributed? Now, as you can probably tell already, these experiments were really all over the place. They were doing all of these crazy things to try and manipulate the human mind. And many of the tests were just all over the place too. In one experiment, they actually gave this woman a bunch of drugs and tried to get her to shoot another person who was asleep in the same room as her. I'm not really sure if that experiment went as planned, but that is taking somebody's life or putting somebody else at danger. And so obviously when all of these experiments started to come up, it was seen as really messed up and highly illegal. In America, there was actually 2 test subjects who I believe ended up passing away due to all of the drugs and whatnot that were performed during these experiments. And if you're familiar with Mkultra, then you probably know that when you go online, there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of people who claim to have been a part of these experiments at one time or another, and that these experiments permanently damaged their health, and they still live with all of these mental problems and physical problems that they gained from these experiments still to this day. So I personally learned about Mkultra several years ago on a completely different, I guess, like level than what I'm talking about right now. I'm going to dive into that a little bit on later in the video. But most of the videos that I have watched, and I have watched plenty of videos on Mkultra since learning about it all those years ago, I find that most of the videos really focus on the experiments themselves, whereas today I kind of want to take a little bit of a different approach, and I want to focus on some of the people who were experimented on and what they went through during these times and the end results of how they're living now. The first person who I want to talk about very briefly is James Witte Bulgar. Now, for those of you who may not know who he is, he was actually an organized crime boss. So he was in prison, and while in prison, he was asked if he would volunteer to be the test subject of Mkultra. I'm not sure if he knew the full extent of the experiments that would be done to him, but he was told that he would be given psychedelic drugs. He thought that this was pretty exciting and kind of got him out of the prison aspect and the prison environment for a little bit. And so with that all being said, he agreed to going into these experiments. James said that during these experiments, him as well as the other test subjects who were in the room with him at the time experienced what he would describe as a real life nightmare. He said that he had never experienced anything like this. He would often see the walls as if they were bleeding. He saw men turning into skeletons right in front of him. He was being filmed at some point during this, and he said that he thought that the camera was a decapitated dog's head. He just said that the things that he went through during this time were unlike anything he had ever experienced in his entire life, and that they were just absolutely horrible. James later also said that in his life, these experiments resulted in him having permanent brain damage, which he was not told could be a side effect of these experiments. However, something else that I just want to make sure to emphasize here is that James was one of the few people who did agree to have these experiments done to him, whereas many of the people who were experimented on during this time didn't know they were being experimented on and didn't agree to all of this, so they honestly probably just felt like they were going absolutely insane. James said that he felt like he was going insane at this time, and he knew that he was on psychedelic drugs and that all of these experiments were happening to him. So you can only imagine the state of mind that this would put somebody in who didn't know that this is what was happening. The next person that I want to talk about very briefly is a man by the name of Kenneth Elton Cassie, also known as Ken Cassie, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with because he is famous for his written novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now, Ken, unlike many of the other test subjects, and just like James Bulgar, did volunteer for these experiments because at the time, he was going through school and he needed the money. I don't really want to focus on Ken Cassie too much because, again, there are some people who had a very bad time during this, and Ken Cassie didn't really come up with that approach. He said that his time while participating in the Mkultra experiments is what inspired him to write the novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because it did make him feel like he was going insane and that he was locked in a mental hospital, but it did give him a huge amount of success. And after this, he started holding LSD parties and things like that. And so he was one of the people who went through all of this, and although he did have some controversial things to say about his time while being experimented on, he was one of the very few people who actually got something out of these experiments. I just wanted to mention a couple people who were more well known in this video to kind of give you guys a look and make you realize that this actually happened. There are people out there today who are still alive who went through all of these really traumatic experiences illegally, and all of these were performed on Canadian and American citizens by the Canadian and American government. As many of you know who watch my videos, I'm from Canada, and so obviously when I type in things like this, the first few things that come up are American, and then there's like a few Canadian ads put here and there. And something that I saw reoccurring over and over again is that while many of the people who talk about going through these experiments, and the whistleblowers in this case, are from the States, a lot of people who talk about this happening to them in Canada say that the experiments that were done in Canada were much, much more severe than the experiments that were going on in the States. A little while ago, I watched an episode of The Fifth Estate that was talking about this particular topic. And in this episode, there was a woman who talked about her experience as a test subject in these experiments. They were performed on her at the Montreal Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University. This is a very interesting episode of The Fifth Estate. I highly recommend watching it. When I first watched this episode, I had no intentions of making this video, but I did revisit that episode while making this video, or getting ready to make this video. In this episode, they talked to a woman by the name of Helen McIntosh and her daughter Deanne. Now, Deanne was quite young when this all took place, but she does remember going to visit her mother in the hospital while this was all going on. I believe that Diane's mother was put into the hospital for something like depression or some kind of mental illness, but it wasn't anything too severe, like she wasn't schizophrenic or anything like that. And Deanne says that as a child going to visit her mother, she was traumatized. There was people in the hospital banging their heads off the walls, doing all of these crazy things in the same room that her mother was kept in. And she said that even as a child, immediately after speaking to her mother, she knew that something just was not right. Unknown to the family at the time, and what they would later find out, is that Helen was an unwilling victim to these experiments that were performed by the CIA and Project Mkultra, and so were many of the other patients who were in the facility with her at that time. Helen talks about in this episode of The Fifth Estate about how when these experiments were done to her, she was pretty much reduced back to being a baby. She needed to wear a diaper, she needed to be hand-fed, she needed to be taken care of almost 24/7. And when she was done being at the hospital, she needed to relearn and be retaught how to do all of these basic things that she already knew how to do and was already doing when she was put into the hospital. Again, Helen had never given permission for any of these experiments to be done to her, and she was never given an explanation even afterwards as to why these experiments had been done to her. Again, something very scary is that during these experiments, many of the test subjects would be put into an induced sleep that would last for days on end. They were given high doses of hallucinogenic drugs and other chemicals that would mess with their brains, and many of these people didn't know that this was happening to them. They just thought they were losing their mind. Many of the people who were chosen at random to be experimented on had gone into these hospitals usually for help with their mental state. Some of them were experiencing depression, some high anxiety levels, things along those lines that just didn't seem to be, I mean, those are severe things, but it's not something that can't be helped. And while going into the hospital for help, instead of being helped, these people were exposed to what I'm going to call absolute torture. This next part of the video is the part of the video that I personally am very nervous to talk about, and I wasn't sure if I was going to include here. But what I'm going to talk about next has really nothing to do with the proof of Mkultra. This is all speculation from a woman who claimed a lot of this had happened to her with no back and no proof. So this is all alleged, this next part. Just take it with a grain of salt. Don't focus too much on it. I just wanted to talk about it because I'm going to link it to something else that I'm going to talk about at the end of the video, which also kind of is just speculation. This is where more of the conspiracy part comes in. It isn't alleged. There isn't anything proving it. Don't come for me. So the next woman who I want to talk about is a woman by the name of Cassie O'Brien. Her case is a little bit more sensitive and controversial than I think any case I have ever spoken about on my channel ever at all. And for that reason, I'm not going to be getting too deeply into it. But there are some things that I'm going to talk about very briefly. Again, there is no proof of this. This is all alleged. This is information that I found online. I personally don't even know much about this. I just found it online. I'm going to use this to link to another part of this video. Please don't kill me. Please don't come for me. Just take this with a grain of salt, and yeah. If you're a longtime conspiracy theorist and you've really looked into Mkultra, then I'm sure that the name Cassie O'Brien is nothing new to you. She is very popular in the conspiracy of Mkultra world. She wrote a book called The Transformation of America, and that is the book that I'm going to talk about a little bit here. I'm going to talk about what she claimed happened to her, but the scary thing about this is she is not the only person who made these dramatic, absolutely insane claims. Okay, so in this first book, she talks about how she from a young age was sexually abused, and that she gave birth to her daughter, and without her knowledge, her daughter was also sexually abused by what she referred to as a trauma-based mind control program to turn her into a sex slave. She also claimed that this happened to her because she was an unwilling participant in Project Monarch, which is a subsection of Mkultra. In this book, she goes on to accuse many well-known people of just absolutely horrible and disgusting things that I'm not even going to entertain here. But she also goes on to say that during the abuse that she was undergoing, this made her develop multiple personality disorder, which they were able to use to their advantage. But during her splits in personality, she was able to kind of piece together the trauma that she had gone through during these experiments. Again, for obvious reasons, I don't want to dive into her case too deeply. I'm telling you guys to take all of this with a grain of salt. But if you do wish to know more information about her, you guys can definitely look her up on your own. But she was the first person, I believe, to openly talk about what she believed was a link between satanic rituals and Project Mkultra. Okay, so done with that and moving on now. The reason that I wanted to talk about her case is because that kind of links to the belief, or the conspiracy, I guess, that many people have today, that a lot of celebrities and famous people are under mind control either by the government or some kind of higher power who are controlling them. And this also kind of links to the Illuminati and a bunch of other conspiracies that I won't be able to get into today, but this is actually how I discovered Mkultra, which is why I wanted to link it all at the end of this video, even though I'm super uncomfortable talking about the previous topic. So I firstly learned about Mkultra way back, I think when I was just starting high school, or maybe when I was just finishing elementary school. And the way that I found about this was through the Illuminati. Somebody was talking about the Illuminati at school or something like that. And I looked it up, and what I first saw was all of those videos that you find on the internet of celebrities like coming out of character or losing themselves on TV or whatever you want to refer to it as. I'm sure a lot of us have seen those videos. They were very, very popular on the internet way back when, but I started to really look into that because I've always been interested in this kind of stuff, and that is kind of what led me into the whole Mkultra thing. Again, this part of the video is just speculation. It doesn't really have much to do with the first part of the video, but I did want to talk about it to kind of link it all together on how I came across Mkultra. One of the videos that stood out to me in particularly when I was first coming across all of this stuff way back when, and has stuck to me to this day in particularly, is a video of Britney Spears. Now, she's sitting in this video talking to an interviewer, and her emotions, at first she seems like she's not really paying attention, and her emotions switch from like happy, sad, excited, like they're really all over the place, and that is one that really stuck with me and kind of freaked me out when I was younger. It's a quite short video. If I can find it on the internet, I will link it in here so you guys can see it. But again, I'm sure a lot of us have seen those videos floating around the internet, and many people believe that this happens because a lot of celebrities are under mind control, and that during this they are used as sleeper cells, they are used as sex slaves, their minds are corrupt, and that somebody else is controlling them.
You've had a year that would test a lot of people. Illness in the family. A breakup. This spasm of publicity about what happened from Mexico to London.
It was pretty rough, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Ah, weird. Hello. Oh my goodness. Hello. Ew. Strong Britney. Yeah, it was a weird time. Ew. I'm embarrassed. Can we stop?
I talked about Britney Spears already, but she is one person who was and still is strongly believed by a lot of these conspiracy theorists to be somebody who is a product of mind control. But she is not the only one, obviously. Many other very famous young people are speculated by these conspiracy theorists to also be used underneath mind control, such as Justin Bieber, and that they are being used by either the government or somebody else to kind of distract the public. For example, if something was going on that was bad in another country or something like that, to kind of distract the public from that, they would come out with another young celebrity scandal. Now again, I apologize if I'm scatterbrained or seem all over the place in this part of the video. This part isn't something that I'm too nervous to talk about, but this entire video just has me feeling a little unsettled, but I did want to give it to you guys anyways. But again, take this all with a grain of salt. There is no proof this is all just alleged. But anyways, the reason that I wanted to end this video off with this is because Mkultra, which again has been proven to have actually happened way back when, is linked to several other conspiracy theories. It is linked to the Illuminati. It is linked to the fact that many people out there believe that a lot of the celebrities and people in Hollywood are reptilian aliens. It is also linked to parts of the Franklin cover-up, Pizzagate. All of these really crazy conspiracies, a lot of them can be linked back to Mkultra. Now, I personally don't want to dive into every single one of those topics, especially because I do feel, again, very uncomfortable putting myself on the internet talking about these things. But I would just be in over my head in research. It's a lot. And I just want to finish off by saying there isn't a lot of back to a lot of these claims, but because they do all involve Mkultra, and I do think that even though there isn't a lot of factual basis on a lot of these topics, they are very interesting to read about if you guys are cooped up in your house and looking for something to research. But guys, that brings us to the end of this video. I think this is the only video that I have ever made that has me feeling on edge, so you guys could really help me out by giving this video a big thumbs up if you liked it. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching. Please take this video with a grain of salt, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.